Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Improve Podcast, the official podcast of Classic Studios. I'm your host, Chase Collins, and Happy New Year. It is 2023, and we are getting the year started off right with a whole month, an entire month of fitness-themed podcasts. So it's the beginning of the year. People are feeling refreshed. They're feeling remotivated. They're wanting to get back into the gym. They're wanting to get their health in order. And that's what we're going to do for you for this month of January. We're going to dive into fun fitness-themed topics for the next month. So I hope you're excited for that. We are kicking off the month with 100 days without drinking. That was a challenge that Brian and I sort of started at the beginning of September, and at the time of recording this, we're about 30 days in. We wanted to re-examine our relationship with alcohol and put a pause on drinking for 100 days and just see how our lives changed or improved or what happened. So it's a great conversation. Part 2, when we actually meet that 100-day mark, is going to come out later this month, but I am really excited for you all to hear this. If you want to jump around, there's time codes in the description, and if you want to stick around to the end to hear about my goals for this week, feel free to do that. And don't forget to set your goals this week. All right, I'll catch you later. Bye.
Improve Podcast.
All right, man. Let's yeah, dude. So today, the day we're recording this is October 21st, and for me, this has actually been exactly 30 days or 1 month. I guess maybe it hasn't been 30 days, but it's been almost exactly 1 month of no alcohol, nothing like that. And that's, I guess, what the episode is going to be about, is this sobriety challenge that you sort of pitched to the group, or you said you were going to do it, and then I jumped on the bandwagon. And what I have some questions that I want to ask you, but I don't know if there's anything you wanted to start off first with, or if you just want me to start asking questions.
Yeah, I guess really quickly, first of all, big ups, dude. Congrats on the 1 month. Can you think in your mind, can you remember if there's ever been a time since we started drinking as teenagers, have you gone a month without drinking alcohol?
I'm trying to think.
Isn't that an
It's
interesting question? Like you have to think about it.
Yeah, it is interesting. And like we've talked about this a little bit off the podcast, but like yeah, no, I don't think so. Especially not once I actually got to college. It's like there's no shot. Like I want to say maybe like when I don't know, probably not. Probably not.
Yeah,
How about
it's
you?
just I couldn't think of a time. I mean, I've gone, a couple weeks here and there maybe, but that's one question that really kind of opened my eyes. Like I couldn't tell you if I'd ever gone a month without it. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'd have to really sit down and think about it, but the answer would be probably not. Maybe like in high school. I don't know. It's hard to
right.
say. Um, once we
I wonder
started.
how common that is for like everyone who's listening right now. Like can anyone say they've gone a month without drinking?
Yeah,
And
it's
I'm
it's a
sure
it's a
yeah.
fascinating question, because once people start, oh, dude, yeah, I was thinking about this podcast earlier and like what I was gonna say and everything, and this ties in perfectly. I just want to mention, the whole easy peasy for like quitting smoking or whatever,
Oh yeah.
the big
Alan
monster and the
Carr's.
little monster. Yeah. So like once you get ingrained into the alcohol culture, like that's the big monster, right? It's like, oh, everyone else is
Mhm.
doing it. It's just a part of the culture. So like
Yep.
that big monster is what really drives a lot of like the societal like the culture and the norms around drinking. It's just like, oh, it's legal, there's commercials for it, there are bars, and like my parents drink and like whatever, like it's a normal adult thing. Like that's the big monster, dude.
It is. Yeah, you're exactly right. And then that little monster is I guess the addiction, right? The thing that your body sort of craves, and like whether it's mentally dependent on it or physically dependent on it,
Yeah,
that's
that
what you have
that
to kill
exactly.
first.
Like, oh man, today was a tough day. It was Friday. It was a tough week. Man, I could really go for a drink right now. Like that's the little monster. It's like you
Right.
gotta like
And that's
People
the
don't
one
think
that
about it.
dies that's the one that dies first, like, if you're battling addiction, like, the little monster goes away after a while, but then in the long term, you're fighting society telling you to drink, society telling you to smoke, and your friends and your family, not that anyone's, like, forcing you to drink, but, "Hey, you wanna go to the bar?" Like, "Hey, you wanna go out this weekend? You wanna go to dinner? I'll bring a bottle of wine." It's like, "Oh, no." Suddenly, there's all these influences.
Exactly. So, we don't have to get too far into it in the intro here, but that is something that I thought of today that was like, oh, this would be perfect to just kind of start the podcast maybe or to bring up at some point. Um, just it just as an example of how ingrained alcohol is in our culture, but like for no good reason, really.
Yeah,
It's
it's so
wild.
ingrained in our culture that even before it was legal for us to drink, we can't think of a time that we've gone 30 days sober. Like,
Yeah.
that's how ingrained it is. That's absolutely wild to think about. And so was that sort of part of your motivation to start this? Or like why did you what made you think this was a good idea to like start this journey?
I I've always kind of like been curious about the sobriety and the negative impact of alcohol in my life. I remember when I was a freshman in college, I was in the fraternity and everything, and obviously binge drinking, heavy binge drinking, like the most drinking is just a part of your life, almost daily. But at the very least, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, like you're probably having, I don't know, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 drinks a week, like absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Um, and I started questioning my relationship with alcohol then. And I told one of my buddies, James, it's like,
Oh,
man, I,
nice.
I was like, I don't, as this is freshman year in college, like, I'm not sure about this. I don't think that I have a problem, but do I need to have a problem to stop? And I
Mm.
thought about going sober and 18-year-old kid, it's like, well, anyways, it's Friday now, so I'm gonna forget about that and get drunk or whatever.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking about it for a while because, I've always kind of been into fitness and stuff, and no one is making the argument that alcohol is good for you. That's ridiculous. But uh most of the like most of the thought around it is just, oh, yeah, it's bad for you, but it's not that bad for you. And
Mm.
it's just it's a discussion about how awful the poison is.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's
Cuz
kind of
that's what
always
it
been in the
is.
back
It's
of
the
my head.
poison.
Yeah, exactly. And is oh well, there's like just the entire argument is built, or the entire discussion is built on the premise that it's still worth it. Like, oh yeah, it's what's worth it. It's just built on this implication that, oh well, as long as you don't do too much, it's still worth it. Like you can still enjoy it a little bit here and there, which is probably true. But my point is, no matter how much you drink, it's not good for you. And I've started taking my fitness a little bit more seriously, and alcohol came up as one of the things that I could possibly uh, change in my life to improve certain things like fitness. And it's like, okay, well, how bad is alcohol for me? It's pretty bad for reasons that we might be able to talk to, in this podcast. But what benefit is it giving me? Like, okay, well, it's literally giving me no benefit. So like, why am I drinking?
Right.
Like, what? It's costing me something. It's costing me a lot, but it's not giving me anything. And we can go into what it costs a little bit during this podcast, obviously, and that's probably what we'll do. But that's kind of where I came up with this decision to just give it a break.
Well,
Um,
yeah, I want to dive into that. Like what she just said was really interesting. Like it's the thought of like, yeah, it's worth it. Like, what do you mean by that? Like, what is worth it? Like, there's obvious health detriments that we can go into later, but like, what are the actual benefits? Like, is it a relaxant? Like, not really. Like, are you really relaxed while you're drinking? Like, I don't know. It's just, it's like, it's almost the premise is wrong. The foundation on which the argument is built of like drinking is a good thing is just baseless. And how, yeah, that's like a really interesting
Yeah,
idea.
so that's my point, is that the entire foundation is just like there is no reason to drink. It's all bunk. Um,
Hmm.
but but just because it's so ingrained in our culture, people, and there's not, I'm not judgmental towards people that drink, obviously. But just going through this experience really opened my eyes, and it's made me reflect on my past and my relationship with alcohol. So I'm speaking to um my new perspective on it. But
Yeah.
it's such a part of our culture that people don't ever really consider quitting unless they have a problem, and
Hmm.
it's the big thing. Like, oh, alcohol is the one drug where if you don't do it, people assume you have a problem. That's what people say about it.
And
So yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna ask, I guess. So the reason why you started like you've always been curious about alcohol and your relationship with alcohol, and then you getting really into fitness these last couple of years is what sort of encouraged you or like pushed you to go down the rabbit hole of like, why is this bad for me? Or
Yeah, I mean, so I've always been a drinker, right? And
Mhm.
I've always known that it's bad for me. But when you have youth on your side, you can get away with a lot. When you're like 22, 23, you're not wasting an entire Saturday being hungover. Like, your body's still able to recover. Like, you can have a good workout and then drink that night, and like you're not ruining yourself really, or you don't feel like you are. But as you get older, like I'm 27 now, um which, whatever, that is older than 23. It's
Yeah, it
starting
is.
to, like, fuck, dude, like, you get drunk one night and it's like the entire next day, no matter how much water you drink that day, the day prior to, or the day of drinking, no matter how much like healthy food you eat and like bread that night, like, it doesn't matter. Like, all these hangover cures, um, and I'll talk about my ibuprofen sandwich.
Yeah.
None of it fucking works, and you realize, like, oh, this is just awful. Like, this is not worth it. And sure, um, you could probably moderate it and just have, 3 drinks on a Friday or whatever, and like have a limit. But like, why not just totally get rid of it? Because it's not
Mm.
good. None of it's good. And that's kind of where I am. It's just like, okay, well, let me see
So
if,
like the really bad hangovers like was also a contributing factor.
yeah, I mean, I've any
Because
day,
I
yeah.
Yeah, I was definitely the same way. Like, just as you get older, I think that's true for everyone. Like these hangovers, your liver's not working as hard as it used to.
Yeah, and it's just any day that you spend too long in bed for any reason, it's just like, okay, well, like, why is this happening? It's like, oh, well, I
Yeah.
got drunk last night. Like, oh, well, it must have been a great time, right? It must be worth it. It's like, not really. Just kind of got drunk. Like,
Yeah, and then you
whatever. I borrowed enjoyment from the next day to sit around, and even if you do have a great time, like, you can still have a great time sober, and that's something that I'm starting to learn too.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know. I wanted to figure out if it deserved to be a part of my life. And I'm finding out that it doesn't, uh, and that it's never really deserved to be a part of my life. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and it's whatever it gives you, it takes away more.
That's such
And
an interesting phrase. Like, does it deserve to be a part of my life? That's how you should look at most things, I think, right? Anything you're
yeah,
doing is like,
at the end of the day, it is a or for me, it was a net negative on my life. Like, no
mhm,
matter how I tried to justify it, it was a net negative, and like, it was holding me back for me being like the best version of myself. It was holding me back,
mm,
in a in a fitness perspective, like, alcohol is awful for your muscle recovery and stuff like that. You're never gonna get a good workout hungover. Um, it's just fact. Like, no matter what you tell yourself, that workout wasn't as good as it could have been if you were not hungover.
Yeah.
It's bad for your wallet. Like, you don't even realize how much money you're spending on alcohol until you stop spend until you stop spending money on alcohol, and you're like, oh, I'm saving a bunch of money.
Yeah.
Um, there's all these things that just add up, and it's like, wait a minute, why am I drinking in the first place? It doesn't make any sense. Like, just
Mm,
because I'm used to it, just because everyone else does it, it's uh it's a
that's
sham,
never
dude.
and that's never a good reason to do anything. But so are you speaking from like when you were drinking, was it always binge drinking? Was it always like having not just a glass of wine with dinner and calling it, or was it always like two or three glasses or three or four, so where you have to be hungover?
So
Or
yeah, this is the answer, I guess, is it was different all the time. Sometimes it was binge drinking, but like as I get older, I don't do it as much. But you know, even a glass or two of wine with dinner, like, it adds up. And
mm,
one of the biggest things that I came to realize was that, if you ask anybody, any functioning person in society, that, any of our peers, uh, what they think their drinking level is, like whether they're a light, moderate, or heavy drinker, they're probably going to tell you like, oh, I'm a light or a moderate drinker. But then when you go to like the definition of what a moderate or a heavy drinker is, which I don't have in front of me, I'm sure it'd be easy enough for myself to look it up, but my keyboard's loud.
I'll look it up.
It turns out that, like, oh shit, we're all heavy drinkers, or like, oh, we're all moderate. Like, the light drinkers, or they think they're light drinkers, but they're actually moderate drinkers. And then you look up, like, well, what does that mean for my health? It's like, well, it's not good. Being a moderate drinker is not good. So I was probably a heavy drinker throughout my entire life, even though that makes it sound like I had a problem. I never really did
Right.
have a problem per se, but it was still a net negative on my life.
So I'm looking at the drinking status, and this is from CDC.gov. So take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
um, but it says a current light drinker is at least 12 drinks in the past year, but 3 drinks or fewer per week on average for the past year. A current moderate drinker is more than 3 drinks, but no more than 7 drinks per week. That's for women, and for men, it's 3 drinks, but no more than 14 drinks per week. And a heavy drinker is more than 7 drinks per week for women and more than 14 drinks per week for men. So, like, that doesn't sound like a lot to me. A heavy drinker is 17 drinks per week. That doesn't sound like a
Yeah.
ton, right?
So think about, like, if you have a glass of wine every single day, like Monday through Friday after work. So that's 5. And then maybe like Thursday you have a couple, just because, tomorrow's Friday.
That's right.
And then Friday night, you're like, okay, cool, let's go to a bar or whatever, or like to go to dinner or something, hang out with friends. You have a glass of wine before you leave, perhaps two, and then you show up, and then it, if you have one like social gathering in a week, you're probably having like 5 drinks, right? I mean, that's what I would guess
That's what I would
for
do.
our peers. Maybe that sounds like a lot, but maybe not. Like, you're not drunk, but hey, you're feeling a pretty good buzz, you're feeling tipsy. And then, that's Friday night. Saturday night, same thing. And then maybe Saturday during the day or Sunday during the day, you have like a beer, or like you go to a winery or something. I don't know. But boom, like, you're a heavy drinker. Like,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know what I mean? It all
Yeah,
adds
I
up.
mean, it all adds up. That's like 5 you just said during the week, and then plus 5 like over the one social gathering, you're at 10 already, and then it just adds up so crazy, and you're already at 14 like that.
Yeah. So you just spent $100 on booze that week,
Mhm.
and you never gave your body much like rest to get it out of your system. Your sleep is absolutely wrecked. Like, no doubt, your sleep is awful,
Yeah.
and you probably woke up late, Saturday morning and Sunday morning with maybe a hangover, maybe just a little headache, but whatever, you're not as fresh as you could be. So, I mean, that's kind of where I was, give or take some. Some weekends obviously, but like big family gatherings or like big like Halloween party or like 4th of July, like obviously you're drinking a lot more.
Mhm.
So, but do you have to drink during those events? And the answer is no. Um, and that's one thing that I was really worried about because, and we've talked about this, like I've built alcohol a little bit into like my identity with homebrewing and stuff. Like I feel a small sense of like pride and like how I make my mead and stuff. Um, and I had to prepare myself to let that leave my identity, and I had to let that go. I had to accept the fact that I was going to be leaving these things behind. Because ultimately it's not a I mean, yeah, it's an art and it's a hobby and everything, but for me, I would rather my identity be based upon being the best version of myself from a health perspective and being an effective human rather than being a good brewer. And
Right.
I had to make that decision, and you have to make those decisions. And like I was a member at Adventure Brewing. I'm a gold member at Adventure Brewing, and when you become a gold member, you get a keychain with a number on it, and that's your member number. And obviously, it's cool to have like a lower number, and because there's hundreds of members. So if you have number like 362, like that doesn't mean anything. But my number was 007. It's double oh
Ooh.
007. It's a low number and it's the coolest number you can get.
Yeah, that's
And that
so
was
cool.
that was part of these things they add up, and they create this bad argument in your mind like, oh well, I can't stop drinking because I have number 007 for Adventure Brewing for my gold membership. Like I can't give that up. Like that's and it creates this tiny little like argument in your head. And it's like, oh, well, what am I going to do? I have all this homebrew equipment. I can't stop drinking. I can't stop brewing. I
Mhm.
have I have mead that's aging right now that I'm working on. I can't stop drinking. And it just creates these little arguments, and they build up. And that was one thing that I had to do is I had to sit down and like, okay, is this hobby or this whatever, is it worth it to me? And the answer was just no, it's not. And by the way, you can still homebrew and not drink. That's one of my plans.
That is it's so interesting, like, hearing 'cause, I asked, what was, like, your level of drinking, like, before you decided to, do this 100 days of sobriety challenge, and it sounds like for both of us, we were probably at least the heavy drinker, or between the heavy drinker and the conservative drinker for me, and that's, like, um well, you are much more, like, ingrained in that drinking culture, so that has to be such it's a much more difficult, I guess, like, challenge to approach compared to, like, where I was with my, like, drinking habits, and that's I think your insight is so, like, interesting. It's so counter to, like, mine because I wouldn't consider myself a part of the drinking culture, like, I don't have a membership at Adventure Brewing Company, our favorite local brewery. I don't have a home brewing kit, so it was interesting hearing, like, your how you had to approach it, like, it really was, like, a part of your culture, it sounds like, and that's gotta be because 'cause you're not only, like, I guess not leaving your social gatherings, but I know, like, in certain cultures, like, as soon as you stop going out to the bars or as soon as you stop drinking at the bars, like, you stop getting invited to the bars, and, like, your friends slowly start to alienate you, like, that's not true for everyone, and that's not gonna be true for our friend group because our social life isn't centered around drinking. I mean, it kind of was, it kind of is, but it doesn't have to be, and we're better friends than that. We have better friends than that who would just start alienating you as soon as you drop their favorite habit, right? But that's definitely something that would like is enough to prevent most people from taking like the challenge to be sober for 100 days, or even just like participating in Sober October, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you'll find out who your friends are.
Mm,
And thankfully that was never a consideration of mine really. Cause I knew that my good friends that I really care for, it wouldn't be anything other than like, oh, I'm happy for you, dude. That's cool. Like, whatever.
yeah.
Whereas, some people probably they're perhaps not so lucky and maybe they don't have as good as of friendships that that we were so lucky to have to where maybe it is a problem for them where they will lose some of their what they thought were their friends. And that's just something that you got to do for yourself at the end of the day. But yeah, man, going back to like the culture thing, Katie and I, my wife, for those of you who are listening that don't know me, we would go to wineries like all the time. Um,
Mm,
and, you know, like, hey, let's check out this brewery. Let's go to this winery, whatever. We got engaged at a winery.
yeah.
Um, and the more I think about it and like the longer that I go being sober, the more I can really appreciate these places for just what they are instead of like, oh, like let's grab a drink there. Like, dude, we can still go to wineries and just like this is a beautiful place. And I'll
Mm,
just have a water and whoever is there will have a glass of wine or whatever. But it's also nice because there's so many things. I am the DD now,
yeah.
obviously. Like I'm not drinking, which is cool. I have all the power. I'm not just some like buzzed or drunk guy that's just there. Like I actually have a little bit of like autonomy and um I can make decisions because I'm obviously like the most rational person there if I'm DDing. And I get to just enjoy these places and like hang out with my family. Uh we went to we went to family weekend for JMU for those of you who are not familiar. It's like this weekend where families go and visit their college kids who are students at JMU, James Madison University, and oh man, it's just like the best weekend ever because everyone gets trashed. It's similar to like homecoming, and
Yeah.
I did it sober. I did it sober and
That's
hung out with my
wild.
family, and everyone was drinking, and I didn't really think twice about it. We recently just had our anniversary, and we went to Savannah, Georgia. Didn't have a drink. Didn't think twice about it. Just enjoyed it. Really, I mean, just enjoyed the time. So those were two big things, two big tests, and I never really felt the need to grab a drink and get drunk. It's just so much nicer. I don't know. I don't
That's
have to worry about it.
Well, that's like really, and that's man, that yeah, I think those are two like huge monumental things that like really shouldn't be minimized. Like those are two significant events, like especially the family parents weekend or family weekend that's all about centered around drinking. Like college culture is very centered around
It's a
drinking.
tradition,
And so
yeah.
you're diving back into that environment where there's like a bunch of big monsters like or triggers or whatever. Like oh man, I always had a drink on the quad or whatever, like all these different like traditions that trigger drinking. And then also like, yeah, an anniversary. That's obviously going to be something that most people would have a drink at, a glass of wine or a glass of champagne to commemorate the event. And being like strong and like, I guess there's two ways to look at it, right? And I think one is probably better than the other. There's one way of like, oh, I'm abstaining from this, I'm being strong, I'm being, disciplined. And then there's another way to look at it of like, no, it's not it's something I don't do. And that's I think like the mindset of like that needs to shift once you kill the big monster of like you understand this is bad for you and so I'm doing it to preserve my health. It's not like, oh, I'm greater than you or I'm better than you. It's like this is a personal choice that I've made for myself that's I'm not going to do it because it's better for me if I abstain. You know what I mean? It's not like
Yeah,
I'm
it's not from a negative, like it's not like, "Oh,
I'm losing
I
out
have to
on
be
this.
sober." It's the positive part of it. It's like,
Yes.
"Oh, this is so awesome that I get to experience this and really fully enjoy it and be useful and an effective human being." Like, this is, this is awesome. This is really great. It's that perspective of the positivity side of things.
And that is 100% like the correct way to look at those things. And like I think whatever gets you to a place of like being more healthy, like whatever motivation you can like instill in yourself to get there is awesome. But I think for people who are trying to do this long term, like eventually your perspective has to shift from, oh, I'm missing out on drinking because I have a problem, to, wow, look at how healthy I am. And I get to be healthier because I don't choose to, poison myself on a daily or weekly basis.
Absolutely. Um, and at the end of the day, like, people make their own decisions. And I'll never judge anybody for drinking or anything like that. That's not what this is about. But what's interesting to me, and like one of the things that I wrestled with a little bit, was just like not knowing that it was bad, really. I mean,
Mm.
obviously it's not good for you, but like, how bad for you is it? I just didn't really think about it. It was never really on my radar. Like, it's not a problem. Like, why would I stop doing this? It's just part of my culture and everything. Whatever, tradition and habit. But once you question it, you have to question it. And once you question it, then you'll find all the answers that you need. If you're serious about about learning about your relationship with alcohol and everything. Once you start thinking about it, these little things start coming into place, and you're like, I don't know. Do I need this? Is this good for me?
Well,
So
yeah,
it's been a really interesting process.
and that's something we talked about last time, or a couple of episodes ago. We talked about like being on autopilot, right? It's like, well, I do these things because I'm supposed to do them, right? Like, right? Aren't Isn't that correct? Like, well, maybe it's not. Like, why don't you dig a little bit deeper and like examine your habits and try and figure out if these habits that you're like participating in, even if you are unknowingly participating in these habits, like try to figure out why you're doing these things. Like, are you watching the latest season of your favorite show because you enjoy it, or is it just because it's what's trending right now and everyone's going to be talking about it at work? Like, and you don't want to feel left out, or like, are you picking up that drink because it's good for you because you want to, or is it just because everyone else is picking up a drink? Yeah. And I think like being self-aware enough to critically examine yourself, like that's something I don't think most people can do, or like do because it's just not something they know to think about. And I've had to do that a number of times with like a number of different like aspects of my life, right? Like whether, oh gosh, I can't come up with any examples right now, but I know that
Yeah, I
feeling. I
mean,
know that feeling for
introspection
sure.
is a skill. Yeah. Um, Introspection is definitely, it's a skill, and it's something that everyone has to learn how to do. But yeah, it's interesting you mentioned like watching your favorite show and stuff like that. It For me, alcohol was a it was like a passive thing where I didn't really make the decision to drink. It was just like, oh, by default, now it's 5 o'clock on a Thursday or a Friday. Like,
Hmm.
it's happy hour by default. I'm just gonna drink. Um, but like, why? Like, why are you gonna drink? Like, oh well, whatever excuse. It was a long day. I'm stressed out. Like, well, why are you stressed out? Alcohol is not gonna solve that stress for you. It's just gonna help you cope with it.
Well, and
And
I think like
yeah, go
going
ahead.
even like a little bit, like that's the big monster, right? Who's talking to you, saying like, "Oh, well, it's happy hour. It's 5 o'clock. That's what I'm supposed to do." But then there's also like a bodily element to it too. That's not the right word, but there's something, the habitual,
A
like,
physical
oh,
addiction, yeah.
yeah, that's not even, it's almost subconscious to a certain point where it's like, oh, I'm getting excited, like, oh, I'm gonna clock out and I get to pour myself my first drink. It's like there's something going on that's like even deeper than, like, not that you're conveying it wrong. That's not what I'm trying to say. But just like those are sort of how we're verbalizing it. But I think there's also like the addictive component that's like happening subconsciously as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I agree with you 100%. Um, and at this point, I guess there's two separate things. There's like the habitual part of it, right? Whether, it's a combination of the physical and I guess you'd call it a chemical and like your emotional relationship with alcohol and
Mm,
like the habits because you form these habits over years and years. But there's also just the underlying fact that like you're stressed out or like you're upset or whatever, like, if you have a bad work day and you think to yourself, "Oh man, I really need to drink." Like that's like you're using alcohol as a coping mechanism. Like that's what your body's doing.
to manage
Cuz
your stress levels.
yeah, but like that thing that caused you the stress in the first place is still there and like you're not fixing that.
Right.
So being sober, it is it's about like it's about facing those problems that cause you the stress in the first place. Because like it'll be 6 or 7 p.m. on a Friday, and you had a shitty week, and it's like, okay, well, let me reflect on that instead of numbing myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it's so
So
funny. Sorry if I
no, go ahead. I
uh
was done.
well, day, so it's the 21st, October 21st when we're recording this, and it's been 1 month for me sober. I know you started a little bit before I did. What was the day you started? Do you remember?
I started September 17.
September 17. I started, yeah, September 21 or 22, something like that. I think it was the 22nd. But the the that Thursday, I think the 22nd was a Thursday, was the most stressful day I'd had at work ever. Like ever. I think I messaged you about it, or I messaged the group chat
Yeah.
and was just like, "Wow, what a day to decide to stop drinking." And that was the perfect excuse. I had the perfect excuse to grab a glass of whiskey or whatever. It was, the worst day. Like I would love to go into, but I don't want to because it was just so stupid and like I'm over it. But it was if I wanted to not do this challenge with you, I had the best excuse. But I messaged you and you were like, why don't you just not drink? It's like, yeah, it's just so simple. Just like don't do
Yeah.
something, right? And that's what I ultimately decided to do because it was like, well, I'm not gonna stop. Like we just started. Like and there's gonna be days like that forever. Like there's never gonna be the opportune time to like start a challenge like this, right? It's just something you have to dive in and do it. And whether it's you have like a family weekend or you have an anniversary or you have a stressful day at work, it's like you have to have the wherewithal and the understanding that like coping or using this drink to suppress isn't going to solve your stressor, right? Like the stressor is what's stressing you and alcohol isn't the solution.
Dude, it's so funny. You just like perfectly summed up this scene from the movie Airplane where one of the guys is like, "Oh, like everything's going crazy," and he's like, "Oh man, I picked a really bad day to stop smoking crack."
Oh my god, that's such a good movie.
Yeah. But yeah, like you said, I mean, that stressor's still there. And if you had that shitty day at work and then you got drunk that night or whatever, and then you woke up maybe you didn't get drunk, but, you had a couple drinks or
Mhm.
whatever, and then you woke up that next morning, you would have been tired, maybe a little hungover, and that shitty feeling would still be there in the back of your mind. You know what I mean?
Oh
It
yeah.
wouldn't have gone away. You would just be hungover also.
Yeah.
So it's like that's not, you don't want that. You can
No.
avoid that.
Yeah, I don't want that at all. And like that's something I've been really like diving in on is this phrase, like the only way out is through. And so, I think it's kind of self-explanatory, but just to dive into it a little bit, like the only way to face your problems or to solve your problems is to go through them and like actually attack like the root of the issue as opposed to just like going around it or like trying to dig underneath it. It's like, no, you got to go through this thing in order to actually solve it. That's something that really, whenever I'm like facing a difficult task or like have a big deadline, it's like, well, the only way I'm gonna get through this is through by actually like attacking it, as opposed to just doing nothing, right? Like the problem's not gonna go away if I
Absolutely.
just sit here and do nothing.
Yeah, yeah, that's I like that. Um, you gotta face it, you know, whatever's giving you any ailment, like you gotta face it.
Yeah, and using drugs and alcohol
Yeah.
to like avoid it is not the solution, right?
Yeah, man. Like today, we've been kind of sick over here, so the house is not the clean. We've been doing our best, but you know,
Yeah,
the kitchen was a little bit of a mess.
right.
Nothing crazy, but it was. Whenever I walked past it, it was like, you know, it gave me this like bad feeling. Like, okay, I'm just gonna go back upstairs. Like, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna. And then I was down there, and I'm like, you know what? Screw it. This is like draining me of like some positive energy that I have. Like, I can feel the stress even when I go upstairs, like, oh, I got to clean the kitchen. So I was just like, you know, screw it, I'm just going to clean it right now. So I just did it and then I felt better. So like I went through the problem instead of like, oh, I'm going to procrastinate. I'll clean it later, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like a very small example of what you just said. And I
No,
think that
dude,
resonated.
I think about that all the time. Like whenever there's, oh, I got to vacuum or I got to mop the floor or whatever. It's like, well, the only way is through, and like it's gonna be a drain on me. Like, God, I hate living in a dirty house or like when my bed's not made. It's just like I'm not OCD, but I definitely like my house clean. I like my bed made. So I
Yeah,
totally.
your dwelling has got to be in order, dude.
Oh yeah, dude.
100%.
Before I can criticize this world. um,
Yeah, yeah.
how's
Uh,
do you mind if I ask some questions?
Go for it, dude.
How's well, I kind of want to. I have a story I want to tell, but first I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'm going to use it to my advantage so I can tell a story. How's Katie taken you being the DD or you being sober?
Oh, dude, she's good. She's stopped most drinking also. I mean, she was never really a heavy drinker at all.
Hmm.
But now that I'm not drinking, she doesn't really have any like reason or excuse to. So during our anniversary, you know, she had like a couple, but that was kind of it. She enjoys me being like useful, I think. You know, like, I can drive and I can make decisions and uh during family weekend there was a situation where someone needed to go drive to pick somebody up, but this was like deep into the day, like everyone had been drinking. It's like,
Yeah.
oh well, I'll just give me the keys, like I'll go pick somebody up, whatever. So you know, I'm sure from like a her perspective, from a wife's perspective, it's nice that her husband is able to be an effective human even on a Saturday night. Like no questions asked. Like, oh yeah, sure, I can drive, you know, whatever. So
That's
go ahead with your story, man.
that's awesome, man. That reminds me of no, I'm just kidding. Um, no, that's actually really interesting. I never thought about it like that. I actually didn't expect I would well, I know Katie's not a big drinker, but I was so it wasn't even like a discussion. It was just like, "Okay, if that's what you want to do, man, go for it."
Yeah, I do all this weird stuff all the time. So for her, it was like, oh, here we go again. Like,
Another weird. Yeah.
yeah, another thing he's doing. Like when I started, you know, like learning Spanish or like uh doing like the when I started building my home gym or started like making mead. It's just like she's like, oh, I hope my kids like don't have as many hobbies as you or whatever. Not
Yeah.
like that, but you know what I mean. She gives me a hard time all the time about because I'm a hobbyist.
Yeah.
So for her, this was just another thing. It was like, oh, here, let's see how long he'll do this for.
Man, you bringing up all of those different hobbies, of like, wow, I want to do a podcast on all of those. And like, well, do we even want to do a podcast on your mead making? It's like because we don't drink anymore. It's like, well, we can still
I
do
can
it.
still make mead.
Yeah, yeah.
It it's the best Christmas present. It's the best present ever because it's homemade and it tastes good. And most everybody, because most everybody drinks, most everybody enjoys you know, enjoys the mead. And I'm kind of like decent at it, so they don't like throw up when they taste it.
Yeah,
There's still value in home brewing. So yeah, we could definitely have a whole podcast about my stupid little hobbies here and there.
dude. I mean, I am totally interested, and I'm gonna go on like the journey of like how you started and how you got to being decent at it or good at it, whatever you just said. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's not award winning by any means, but I mean, hey, I'm biased. I'll stand by my mead. It's
Yeah.
pretty. I think it's pretty good.
Well, I'm definitely, yeah. I would love to like dive into that because I've seen you. Yeah, whatever. We'll do a mead making podcast. We'll put it on the books. Look forward to that coming next week. No, just kidding. It's coming sometime. It'll come in a couple of months maybe. But what when I so you messaged us like mid September about this idea, and I immediately jumped on the train because I get into these states where I'm like hyper productive and like ready to take on the world. And you hit me at the right time, man. Like right when you messaged me that, I was like, yes, no questions asked. Like I'm gonna do this too. I think maybe you
And
prime.
we had just started the accountability group too.
Yes,
So that was yeah.
it was
Just wanted
just
to put that in there.
the iron was hot when you had done that, and we were all like motivated. We were all messaging every single day, just like, oh, this is what I did. This is what I did. Here's my workout. Like, what are you guys doing? Let's let's and so yeah, when you messaged me, it just like lit me on fire, and I was like ready to totally do this with you. And it was also happened to be 100 days until New Year's, which was just like a crazy coincidence. So I was like, wow, I could stay sober until New Year's, and then like New Year's Day, I'll have a glass of champagne or whatever, and that's how I'll start the new year. Like that sounds like such a great serendipitous, like perfect timing type of event. And so that mania, that state of like heightened excitement that I was in, I messaged my family group chat. I think I told you the story, but I messaged my family group chat and I said, "Everybody," in all caps, exclamation points, and I sent them a picture of like the countdown to New Year's. And I said, "It's 100 days until New Year's. Everyone in this family group chat should do 100 days of sobriety. Who's with me?" No one responded. It was radio silent, and I was just hurt. I was really hurt. I was confused, and then so I also forgot too because I was like, I messaged them, no one responded, and so I just like moved on to the next project. And then the next day, I get a call from my father, and he is like, "Hey Chase, are you doing okay? Like, what's wrong with you? Why do you need to be sober? Are you an alcoholic?" I was like, "Oh my gosh, what have I done?" It was so crazy, and I had to send an apology text. I was like, it's come to my attention that an all caps 100-day sobriety challenge does not come across as a fun family event. It comes across like I'm an alcoholic. My apologies." And it was like so interesting. Like I had no idea that they would take it that way, but I guess no, if I received a text like that from you, I would have been like, "Yes, let's do it. I know you don't have a problem. Let's do this challenge." So, I don't know. It was just really strange. But I think like when I mentioned this to you before, you kind of took it as like you said it's alcohol is the only drug that you can stop doing or you can't stop doing without people assuming you have a problem with it. And that was like I think summarized exactly what I had just experienced like in real time. Like because I decided to quit or do this 100-day sobriety thing, everyone assumed I had a problem with it, which was like so alien to me because you had described your drinking habits, and for me, like I don't drink that much to begin with, right? Like I probably do fit into the moderate drinker, right? Like 7 drinks per week. That's probably oh no wait, 14 drinks per week for men is the moderate drinker. That's probably what I would fit in. No more than 14 drinks per week is probably what I would fit into. So like not crazy, but definitely still I have like a couple glasses, over the weekends and everything like that. But so it totally floored me when my family was like assumed that I had a problem because I decided to stop. It's like I don't drink that much to begin with. Like this is just taking it that much further, right? And the reason why
Yeah, it's like,
yeah, go ahead.
"Oh, you're gonna stop drinking, like, why can't you moderate it?"
Right.
Like, that's what a lot of people think. It's like, "No, I can moderate it. I'm going to stop it."
Yeah,
Why doing it in moderation isn't worth it to me at this point, like, I'm going to moderate it to 0.
exactly. That's like because I've talked about this before, but like I really enjoy running. I like working out and lifting, but I can't run if I even have like 2 drinks like the night before. It just like I can't wake up as quickly. I can't my body is just not ready, not prepared to go on a run. And running is something that's just so valuable to me that I chose not to drink to the point where I won't get hungover. So like I've already regulated my drinking habits to the point where I can still maintain like an active lifestyle. And so doing this sobriety challenge for me was really just like optimizing it, like taking it one step further, and honestly made it simpler for me. Like now I don't have to think about, "Oh, can I have this extra glass of whiskey?" Like, "No, I can't, so I have to stop now in order to make my run tomorrow." Now it's like, "Oh, I don't drink, so I don't even have to think about it anymore." It's made my life simpler in that regard.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, you definitely motivated me to start getting up early, and
Oh, that's something
now
I
I'm
wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah, dude. You can't wake up early if you've been drinking the previous night. And I also wake up early during the weekends. And I work out like in the morning and the weekends. So if I drank on a Friday, I would not be able to wake up Saturday morning and lift. Like there's no fucking way.
Yeah.
Um so just like you said, it simplifies everything. I don't have to think about, oh, well, I can still work out if I maybe only have like a couple drinks and I stop at 7. Like, how many decisions is that? That's like a million decisions.
Yeah.
And you're making them when you're vulnerable. It's like, well, why don't you just not do it at all? Like, that's one decision. It's pretty easy to do
Yeah.
instead of like, okay, well, I just had one and I have to, maybe I need to eat something after drinking this. And then I should, in 15 minutes, I can have another one to pace myself. And then I need to drink extra water and go to bed at a certain, it's like, no, just don't drink.
Yeah, and, like, that's so exhausting, like, just hearing you walk through that, it's like, wow, I've had that conversation with myself, like, 1,000 times, and, yeah, I'm exhausted by it just talking to you or hearing it played out in real time, it's like, "Oh my gosh, like, yes, I used to do that all the time," and, like, the other thing that I really wanna come back to is, like, for what, right? Like, "Oh, I'm gonna pace myself, I'm gonna, take ibuprofen, I'm gonna, eat this food, I'm gonna do this, this, and this." In order to keep drinking, in order to stay buzzed, in order to what? Like, be able to laugh more like a social lubricant or, like, what is the actual why are you doing all of this when, like,
Yeah, exactly.
you're doing all of this you're drinking for what reason? Like, I don't know, we'll come back to that. But you're doing all of these subsequent steps of, pacing yourself, taking medicine, eating food in order to not feel the effects of what you're doing and in order to wake up early to work out, like, that's wild when you could cut all of that off by just saying no in the very beginning.
Yeah, you're putting so much energy and so many resources into this thing that you're never really questioning in the first place. It's
Yeah.
like how many hours or minutes or whatever are you spending in a week or a month thinking about all these things? Like how much emotional energy are you putting towards this that you could be using for anything else ever? And it's like, well, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. It's not worth that emotional energy. It's not worth that time. Literally that time that you're sitting there thinking about it. It's not worth it.
Yeah, and it takes, like, you know, of course, like it takes like fractions of seconds to like rationalize yourself and like, okay, well, I'm gonna do this, this, and this, and it gets faster the more you've done it. But also, you're drunk, so it's like that time you take to make those decisions is lengthened, and the time you're drinking is wasted too. So it's like it all compounds on itself. Even just the decision making is, a part of it, but also the drinking, like, and I guess you can't say that like the second alcohol touches your lips, you're wasting time after that point. But it's certainly um, not as effective, I guess.
Yeah, and we've only been talking about like having a couple drinks. We haven't even touched the surface of that one night where maybe you have a couple too many and you make an ass of yourself and you regret it. Like that's a whole separate thing that could be an entirely different conversation. Just taken from a moderate and a light drinking perspective, like that's all we're talking about. And we're coming up with all these reasons not to drink just based on that. Like we haven't even talked about getting too drunk and blacking out and like the possibility of ruining relationships or hurting your relationships or like getting in trouble with the law or like maybe driving in an unsafe manner and like having, like, am I good to drive? Probably. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
those are all things that happen with alcohol too. And when you look at the big picture of all the even even taking out the really bad things that can come with alcohol, drunk driving and whatever, all that stuff, even when you take all that out, you're still looking at like, okay, it's still not worth it, even if I never drink too much and I keep it under control. So that's kind of where I am, man. I'm like, and I've gone through. I think this is day like 33 or whatever, and I've never had the hankering. I've never jonesed for a drink really, and I'm just like enjoying living. And as as you mentioned before, I did say that I'm having fewer highs and fewer lows, and I just feel like steady. And my energy throughout the day is better because I'm not expecting this weird crescendo of like up and down later today. And my body is just like well regulated. It's like it's found an equilibrium that I didn't really know existed because I've just been drinking for so long, and I just feel like more alert like during the day. It's crazy. And part of it obviously is probably like placebo, but I'm happy with that placebo. I'll take it. Like,
Yeah. Whoa, hello everybody. I hope you all enjoyed that podcast. It was definitely a blast to record. Shout out to Brian for getting me on this challenge and motivating me to start it and pick it up. I know it's a bit of a taboo subject and an odd topic to start off the new year with, but I thought it was fun to sort of keep this challenge a secret until we got to release this episode and discuss it fully in its entirety. Like I said, part 2 is going to be coming down the pipeline later this month. It's going to be a part of this fitness themed month of podcasting. I'm not sure if it's going to come out next week or if it's going to come out the week after or like the last week of the January. I don't know. I haven't figured out the schedule yet, but it's coming where we actually have our 100 days completed and we get to dive in all of the the details of how our perspective has changed from 30 days to 100 days. This challenge has allowed me to reflect on my relationship with alcohol and reevaluated its place in the hierarchy of my priorities, right? I talked about priorities last week, and alcohol is not on that list. It's very low, but it's just an interesting question. So I hope you all look forward to that. As far as goals for me this week, I am back in Florida after holiday travels and festivities, and I'm ready to dive back into all of my projects. I sort of had to put them on hold just because, man, it was too busy to keep all of these plates spinning while you're hanging out with family and friends and all that. So if you have family and friends around and you're managing to do anything outside of just your 9 to 5, man, shout out to you. That's awesome. This is the first time I've experienced that type of pull, I guess, from a priority standpoint. So that's been interesting, and I've had to obviously something had to give, and it was my writing and everything like that. So that's been interesting. But yeah, I'm ready to get back into the swing of things. I am excited to get back into running, get back into my disciplined lifestyle that I love to live. And listening back to this podcast as I was editing was just such a good reminder of where I was at the time and where I want to be as a human being. But yeah, so if you guys have any goals that you want to update me on, shoot me an email at theimprovepodcast@gmail.com. and I'd love to hear about it. It's some of my favorite stuff is talking to people, hearing about people who are doing incredible things when you're just an average Joe like me. So that's if you have any stories like that, feel free to shoot me an email, or if you'd like to leave a 5-star review, please leave one. No updates on 5-star reviews yet, but I know they're coming. I can feel it in my bones. All right, with that, thank you to everyone for listening. Be sure to sign up for the Classic Studios newsletter at classicstudios.com. There's still time to sign up for it. The first one's going to be coming out later this week. So if you haven't signed up for it yet and you want to not miss the very first one, be sure to sign up. And I think that's about everything from me. I hope you achieve your goals this week, and I will see you the last sentence of the outro I mess up. Goodbye, everyone. I hope you achieve your goals this week. I will see you Monday for another episode of the Improve Podcast. We are going to be talking about fitness and health and lifting things and putting them down and picking them up. All right. Goodbye.
Podcast.